Okay, so today is the first video of June, so happy Pride Month, everybody. In case you don't know, the Shawshank Redemption is about a man named Andy Dufresne who is convicted of the murder of his wife and her lover, and is sentenced to 2 life sentences in Shawshank State Penitentiary. Even after his conviction, Andy still pleads his innocence to the other prison mates. The film follows his life in Shawshank. The opening of this film is phenomenal. It's shot in a way so we don't know whether or not Andy actually killed his wife. And if he did kill his wife, we also don't know if he knows that he killed his wife. The first scene inside the prison subtly shows the hopelessness of the inmates in Shawshank. When talking about parole, one of the inmates says, "I'm up for rejection next week," which shows that the inmates of Shawshank don't feel like they'll ever get out. In the film, Red, the narrator of the story, speculates that Andy is starting to lose hope after 2 years in the prison. But after he is able to show his talents and prove himself to one of the chief guards, he starts to regain hope. And he gets enough hope to stand up to the man who's been raping him for 2 years. The way this film shows the passage of time is fucking phenomenal. It doesn't have text at the bottom telling you what year. Instead, it uses posters to denote what era it's in. The way the film sets up the warden's ego is amazing, but it's also very subtle. When Andy has a cell toss-up, the warden sees that Andy's reading his Bible. The warden then asks Andy what his favorite passage is, and then responds with his own. "I'm the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but you'll have the light of life." This is a very subtle way to show that the warden has a god complex, that he thinks that beating them to near and sometimes actual death is what is best for them. In the film, there is one problem. At least, something that some people think is a problem. The warden shrugs off Andy's pinups, which, as a fundamentalist Christian, the warden would probably hate. So, a lot of people consider this a problem. But, it's not a problem. I'll explain why. Andy helped the chief with his tax problems. So, the warden let Andy keep up his pinups, so that Andy would later help him launder money. So, by letting Andy keep up his posters, the warden is trying to bribe him or sweeten him up to the later deal. Another thing that this film does incredibly well is how it portrays villains. At the beginning of this film, you're not even really sure that there are any antagonists. And that when the warden is introduced, you think he might be an okay person, or might be sidelined. However, as the film goes on, the warden's goodwill starts to turn into manipulation. This is incredible poetic irony because the warden is a fundamentalist Christian who has a god complex, like I've explained before. However, he has more parallels to the devil. The greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world that he did not exist. When Andy starts talking about hope, Red immediately rejects the idea of hope being a good thing. And then the next thing we see is Red getting rejected for parole. I'll expand upon this a bit later. Halfway through the film, a new prisoner arrives whose name is Tommy. Andy helps Tommy get a high school diploma. Tommy, who's starting to look up to Andy, asks Red what Andy did to get into prison. Red tells Tommy about Andy's wife, and Tommy says that he can prove Andy's innocence. After Tommy tells Andy his story, Andy tells the warden what Tommy told him, and the warden throws Andy into solitary confinement. The group finds out that Tommy got his high school diploma, but before Tommy is released from prison, the warden lures Tommy into a trap and kills him, and then blames it on saying he was trying to escape. The night Andy escapes, it's shot as though he might hang himself, that he lost hope because of Tommy's death. The next 10 minutes are incredibly suspenseful and really well made. Earlier in the film, we see that Andy is trying to carve his name into the walls of the prison. After the scene where we think Andy might have hanged himself, we see an extended version of that scene where it's shown that Andy accidentally knocked off a piece of the wall. This is incredibly gratifying after the suspense of Andy might being hanging himself. And the scene of Andy escaping is one of the best scenes in a film ever. When Red is released from Shawshank, the following scene directly mirrors an earlier scene where another inmate, whose name is Brooks, was also released from Shawshank. However, the ending changes because Brooks hanged himself, but Red does not. By the time Brooke and Red were both released, there is almost no difference between them, except for one. Red has hope. That brings me to the film's themes of hope and acceptance. The only way to get out of the prison is through having both. Red has acceptance, but only after Andy escapes Shawshank does he get hope. Andy has hope. Until after Tommy, he didn't accept the fact that he was a bad husband. Brooks was also released. However, he only left the walls of Shawshank. He was still held prisoner. Okay, before I get to my final opinion on this film, I have to say this. I think The Shawshank Redemption is the best film ever made. Granted, it's not my personal favorite movie. I do genuinely think this is the best film ever made. Okay, let's talk about this for a moment. Typically, in conversation about the best film of all time, 3 movies are brought up: Citizen Kane, The Godfather, and Shawshank Redemption. If you ask one random person to pick the best film in all 3 of these movies, the answer is not going to matter that much. What will is ranking the highest rated movies of all time. Not critics, but public reception. And that's exactly what IMDb did. The highest ranking movie of all time, surprise, surprise, is The Shawshank Redemption, with number 2 being The Godfather, and Citizen Kane not even breaching the top 10. There is another reason why I think The Shawshank Redemption is the best film of all time, and that's its message. If you watch all 3 of these movies back to back, you'll notice that Shawshank stands out, and it stands out for one major reason, and it's that it's hopeful. So hopeful, in fact, that the film is centered on hope. Fear can hold you prisoner, but hope can set you free. That is the tagline for The Shawshank Redemption. Not everyone can learn about a film that's about the life of a millionaire newspaper tycoon or about the mob in Little Italy. However, I think everyone can learn from a film that teaches that hope is one of the most important things that you can have in a bleak situation. In all honesty, I think that this film is perfect. I try not to say that because I have a philosophy that nothing is perfect, but there's no other way I can describe The Shawshank Redemption other than perfect. That's it for the video. Have a happy Pride Month. After Tommy tells Andy his story, Andy goes to the warden to tell the warden what Tommy... What am I saying? Fuck! After Tommy tells Andy his story, Andy tells the warden what Tommy told him, and the warden throws Andy into solitary confinement. I gotta stop with these fucking sentences. Jesus.